Welcome back to the Fearless Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique, and in today's episode, we are going to be looking at and explaining the controversies surrounding the arrest or the detainment of Mahmoud Khalil, a former Colombia student who was detained for his involvement in the pro-Hamas encampments, which swept the nation, but specifically Colombia was kind of the theater for pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas activism. We have followed that story for the better part of 16 months. We've had many episodes covering the developments, again, not just of Colombia, but other universities across the United States. We've talked to Daniel Sir, who is representing Jewish students suing specific Colombia staff members, as well as Students for Justice in Palestine personnel for discrimination following October 7th, as well as the most viral video we have had on this podcast, which looked at President Trump's executive order, which calls for the deportation of foreign students who stand in solidarity for designated terrorist organizations, basically framing these protesters as a threat to U.S. national security. So we're going to look really quickly at that executive order just to refresh us on what that was. And if you didn't see that video, I will link the viral video down in the description box below. But soon after taking office, President Trump signed this executive order I have on the screen entitled Protecting the United States from Foreign Terrorists and Other National Security and Public Safety Threats. And the section that specifically pertains to what we're talking about today is Section 1B. And it reads, to protect Americans, the United States must be vigilant during the visa insurance process to ensure that those aliens approved for admissions into the United States do not intend to harm Americans or our national interest. Most importantly, the United States must identify them before their admission or entry into the United States, and the United States must ensure that admitted aliens, and aliens otherwise already present in the United States, so this would pertain to Khalil, do not bear hostile attitudes towards its citizens, culture, government, institutions, or founding principles, all of which were being protested over the last 16 months with pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian encampments across very prestigious universities and institutions. It continues, and do not advocate for, aid, or support designated foreign terrorists or other threats to our national security. So this is the executive order, which is framing recent action against personnel at Columbia University, former students. The individual we're talking about today specifically is this gentleman here, Mahmoud Khalil. And he is currently being detained, although he has not been charged. And this has swept the nation. We have many people who are outraged by his detention. They're claiming it's a violation of free speech. And the reason Khalil is controversial is because he is not a naturalized U.S. citizen, but he does hold a green card. So there are those saying that the executive order signed by Trump at the onset of his second term does not pertain to Khalil because he benefits from many of the same protections, constitutional protections that me and you who are naturalized citizens would. And so the threat of his deportation is then therefore unconstitutional and a violation of free speech. And we'll get into that in a second. But I want to note that this is not the first student who has been detained following Trump's executive order. This young lady here was detained, I believe, maybe a week after the executive order was signed. And she was a Chinese national who was organizing pro-Palestinian rallies at UCLA. Lu Jun. I could be mispronouncing her name, so please forgive me. But the only news I saw break on this was actually reported by Fox News that her visa was being revoked. And I don't have any other updates on that, but I did want to highlight her story, which broke probably about a month ago, because I didn't really see much coverage on it. The image I have here is her being detained. She has a keffiyeh around her neck, and the pro-Palestinian movement was largely silent about it, which I want to point out because I think she, being a Chinese national, does not fit the narrative that the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas movement here in the United States wants, which would have been a Palestinian student. So Khalil kind of fits that narrative in that mold. I didn't see much outrage or protest about her detainment or the revoking of her student visa. Now, she did not hold a green card. She held a student visa to study at UCLA. But again, her story has kind of grown cold. I haven't seen, national news outlets covering it, but I did want to point to her because there was very little outrage. So I think there's also selective outrage on the part of pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas sympathizers here in the United States. So we've seen a lot of outrage, as I mentioned, following Khalil's detainment. Here is a social media post just to kind of give you guys a little bit of a taste of the narrative and the rhetoric surrounding his detainment. So this pro-Palestinian social justice page posted, Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil has been kidnapped by the United States government, because they're viewing this as a illegitimate detainment. They basically break the news that he is now being held in ICE detention in a detention center in Louisiana, that he was taken on the evening of March 8th by officers of the Department of Homeland Security. And this is kind of the narrative surrounding his detainment, is that it is unconstitutional. He's been kidnapped. This is President Trump's way of illegally intimidating free speech on college campuses that diverges from the pro-Israel narrative of either, if you're Candace Owens or a conspiracy theorist, the deep state, or the pro-Israel lobby here in the United States. And remember that many of these students, these social justice activists, don't even see the United States government as legitimate. They see it as, authoritarian. It must be completely destroyed and rebuilt. And so they don't even view ICE, for example, as a legitimate kind of US federal body, but they're claiming he's been kidnapped. And this is Khalil in his own words. So that was kind of Khalil for a second in his own words. He's saying him being detained is not about breaking campus rules and that you can't contain the movement, and it's an anti-war movement, which I fundamentally take issue with for many reasons, particularly because it's not an anti-war movement. It's a pro-terrorist movement. It is a pro-authoritarian regime's ambitions to annihilate Jews from the river to the sea movement. So it is the most hypocritical position to take to say that this is an anti-war movement when you are wearing keffiyehs, which have become a symbol of not just pro-Palestinian sentiments, but pro-Hamas sentiments. And remember that Hamas is a militant Islamist organization which does not provide due process for their own citizens or protect free speech or freedom of assembly or even the right to vote for their representatives. Because remember, Hamas has not held elections since it took power 2006, 2007. So that's incorrect. This is not an anti-war movement. This is a pro-militant organization movement, and that is why he's being detained. So the reason I wanted to highlight this clip was twofold. So first, he was arrested from his university residence. So even though he's already a graduate, he still maintains a presence on Columbia's university campuses. He still apparently is in some sort of student housing. And secondfold, he is being acknowledged as one of the key negotiators for the pro-Palestinian, Students for Justice in Palestine movements, which I think is absolutely ridiculous to even call him a negotiator. This was a form of attrition by a large part of the student body who was ideologically possessed and indoctrinated to then hold their own university captive to bend a knee to their demands to divest from Israel. So again, you can't say this is a, anti-war movement when you're using the same tactics of attrition that militant groups in the Middle East use to try and make their adversaries bend the knee to their insane demands. So again, I do want to highlight that he did play a leadership role in the college encampment. He was one of the leaders for the radical group Colombia United Apartheid Divest, CUAD, which sympathizes with terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and calls for the end of Western civilization. So again, kind of going back to the executive order by President Trump, he was calling for the dismantling and held hostile attitudes towards U.S. culture, its government, and its institutions and its founding principles, calling for the end of Western civilization while you're receiving an education at a prestigious Ivy League school in the United States is hypocritical. And it's a privilege that Khalil, as a foreign student, green card holder, only has here in the United States. He could never do that in the Middle East. And this goes for all foreign students who come here and want to benefit from free speech, free thinking, open markets, freedom of assembly. But then they want to undermine those very values by calling for the divestment of not just Israel, but also Western values on their college campuses. It's absolutely ludicrous. Again, I think the biggest irony of these college encampments has been that they use their constitutional right to freely assemble and for free speech to then call for the, culture to shift from those very principles and values and sympathize with an alt-authoritarian Islamist organization that, again, does not provide freedom of speech, freedom of assembly for their own citizens in Gaza. So it's just the biggest hypocrisy surrounding just these recent college encampments. So these are also some of the social media posts I just wanted to highlight. I did a really quick scrolling through of his organization's social media. This one right here says, annihilate these demons. There's a kind of an image of a demon. A lot of the imagery on their Instagram for the CUAP apartheid divest page kind of harkens back to demonic, like demon imagery of the Jews. So this is not explicitly supposed to be a Jewish person, but there are parallels with, Jews being demons, or maybe this is supposed to be explicit, which if it is, absolutely shame on them. I would not be surprised. Because remember, this pro-Palestinian kind of rhetoric of Colombia's college encampments is also anti, not just Israel, but Jewish as well. And they harass all of their Jewish peers. There was fear from Jewish students even going to school, which again reminds us of interwar years in Germany, when a lot of the initial anti-Semitism that happened took place on college campuses and prevented Jewish students from freely attending classes without fear of discrimination. But if you just look at their Instagram, it's full of just dark imagery. We have here, Columbia University is thrilled to invite architect of genocide. It is the ambassador to Israel, and he has been characterized as a demon. Again, very anti-Semitic, age-old tropes as Jews as demons. So we see that imagery. And then we see here how, what to do if ICE basically detains you. They have a picture of a pig for the police. Again, harkening back to, communist, even 1960s anti-war protest. And then you have here an image, wanted, dean of students, Lisa Greenidge, reward for basically a meeting. So you see this too, which is very scary, that you have the student body demanding a meeting with the dean of students. Again, this wanted poster looks like a hit on the dean of students. Obviously, there's a reward for a meeting, but this looks like what you might even see in the Middle East when there's essentially these cards calling for the assassination of specific individuals with a reward. This looks like a bounty on her head. So again, Khalil can get up and say this is an anti-war movement, but it's anything but peaceful. It uses similar tactics to the attrition of terrorist organizations in the Middle East. And yet we still have a large swath of Americans who are outraged that Khalil has been detained. Of course, none other than my favorite person, Candace Owens. Okay, so the reason they're pursuing his deportation, Candace, is because he is sympathizing with and causing attrition and chaos and disorder and harassment to Jewish students on Colombia's campus. And while he is a green card holder, he is still outwardly supporting Hamas and Hezbollah, which is a threat to U.S. national security. The fact that that wasn't a threat under the Biden administration is mind-blowing, but that standard has now been set under the Trump administration that if you sympathize openly with and help organize American nationals to support Hamas and Hezbollah, and you are not a naturalized U.S. citizen, then you will be deported. Now, again, the kind of gray area is if you are a green card holder or just a visa holder. This was what I thought was a brilliant response by Speaker of the House Mike Johnson when asked, what crime did Khalil commit to be detained? So as he's pointing out, Colombia failed to protect their Jewish students. They bent a knee to the absolute insanity of different pro-Palestinian student groups taking over buildings such as the library, I believe Hamilton Hall on Columbia's campus, and negotiating with people like Khalil to meet demands of the student population, which is absolutely insanity. And of course, with that came discrimination against Jewish students, which is a violation of these naturalized students' rights here in the United States. And so, yes, Khalil helped organize and then infringe on the rights of his Jewish peers at Columbia University. And again, he's not a naturalized U.S. citizen, and there are legal consequences for that. So this brings us kind of to what is the issue. And the issue is that Khalil is a green card holder. So his status is not that of just a student with a student visa studying at an American university. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that he intends to essentially revoke the visas and or green cards of Hamas supporters in America, and that they will be deported. So that's some of the official rhetoric coming out of the current administration, which again is in line with the executive order that Trump signed soon after taking office. And of course, we're going to have to wait and see. I believe there's a hearing next week on if the basically Homeland Security's jurisdiction allows them to revoke. So as this Just Security article points out, or they claim, obviously they have a bent here, that Rubio or any other government personnel can just revoke the status of a lawful permanent resident who has a green card. They still benefit from many of the privileges as permanent naturalized residents of the United States. And in order to revoke Khalil's visa, they have to basically make the case for why he should be deported. Essentially, he has violated the conditions for his green card, which, going back to the executive order supporting a designated recognized terrorist organization in the United States under the Trump administration, seems to be one of the criteria that is acceptable for revoking a green card. Homeland Security continues to search other students' homes at Columbia. I don't think Khalil's kind of story is going to be the first one that we see. The Trump administration is making it very clear that if you support a terrorist organization and you are not a naturalized citizen, then you will be deported. So 2 other students' homes have been searched. Maybe there's even something deeper going on here. There, of course, are ties and connections to direct funding of Iran to these university college encampments, as well as different individual student organizations. So perhaps there is evidence, or they are searching for evidence of that connection. But I don't believe Khalil's story is going to be the last one. This is the interim president of Colombia. She sent out an email to the student body saying, regrettably, she has to comply with the federal government's warrants to search these students' homes. And DHS went in and served Columbia University, because I'm assuming they are also students living in some sort of official campus housing. And so this is just, I think, the first story we're going to see break, because President Trump is going to make an example of Khalil, even if he's a green card holder or not, that if you incite radicalism on an American university campus, then you no longer have the privilege of living in the United States. You can't live in the United States, one of the freest countries in the world, and enjoy all the privileges of being a green card holder, and then also call for the complete dismantling of that very country is ludicrous. And no other country would allow it except for apparently the United States and other Western countries, which we see are currently in Europe being run over by Islamist and pro-Muslim ideals that don't want to assimilate to Western norms or the countries that have taken them in from the authoritarian either persecution or turmoil of their homes from the Middle East. And that has to be brought to a stop. And President Trump, I think, is doing that with the case of Khalil and following through on his executive order. Of course, we're going to have to continue following this story to see what the legal ramifications are when it comes to student visa holders versus green card holders. But I believe what President Trump and Marco Rubio are pointing to is that even if you hold a green card, if you violate the terms to maintain that green card, then you will be deported, and supporting Hezbollah and Hamas is one of those violations. Now, President Trump has not just stopped there. He has also canceled around $400 million in federal grants to Columbia University for failing to protect their Jewish students and for allowing the chaos to ensue on their college campuses over the last 16 months. And the message is clear. If university campuses cannot contain their radicalism, then they will lose federal support, and the students who are inciting that violence will then be deported. And so we'll see if that helps squash the insanity we've seen across university campuses. Again, the story of Khalil is not yet complete. We will have to see what happens when they go before a judge in New York next week, and maybe we'll have some updates for you then. Like always, please like, comment, and subscribe to the Fearless Project podcast and just the Fearless Project channel. If you would like to continue following this story, we'll probably post about it on our Instagram, so please follow us there, and on X. All of the links to our handles will be in the description box below, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.